call to the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Many Australians have been watching with horror and deep sorrow at the events taking place in Israel and Gaza. I know this is a very distressing situation for Australians that are in Gaza and Israel and of course, their families at home. Deputy Speaker, I start by acknowledging the devastating loss of Israeli and Palestinian lives and the terrible harm inflicted upon innocent civilians as a result of conflict. As we've heard today from many speakers, all loss of human life matters, and I join the Prime Minister and other speakers in this place in condemning any threats or acts of violence against innocent people. This should never be tolerated, and we cannot be indifferent to human suffering wherever it occurs. It is in these dire and difficult moments that we must recognise and embrace our shared humanity. The Palestinian people are suffering greatly, and this suffering has impacted on generations of Palestinians. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, which is home to 2 million people, is deteriorating rapidly. We are monitoring the situation closely and we support the work of the United Nations, the United States, Israel and Egypt to establish safe passage for Gaza's civilians. Deputy Speaker, the cycle of hatred, violence and despair between Israelis and Palestinians has been ongoing for almost a century. Now, I'm a person of Egyptian heritage. My own family has been part of this conflict for the past 70 years. My grandfather, my father and my uncles fought in the Egyptian army in the wars of 1948, 1956, 1967 and 1973. Our own family home back in Egypt in Port Said was reduced to rubble by Israeli airstrikes in 1956. And I, like many Australians, have a personal understanding and connection to the region and its history. And I acknowledge the suffering, the decades of suffering that Palestinians have had under occupation. But I have to state with moral clarity here, as we've heard from other speakers, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that all of these facts, the suffering, the occupation, do not justify Hamas's terrorist attacks. Now, despite all of this, despite the current crisis, Deputy Speaker, and the decades of conflict, I still support a two-state solution. It might sound strange to say that, but long-term stability and peace will not be achieved in the region until Palestinian self-determination is realised and until the Palestinian people have a state of their own. Many Israelis know this. I have continued to advocate and urge that we work continually with our friends and allies in the international community to commit to advancing what has been an elusive long-term goal of a sustainable two-state solution. It has to be based on justice, on self-determination, peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike. In fact, Australia has a long and proud history of supporting a just and durable two-state solution to this conflict. During this crisis, our government has called for the utmost efforts to be made to protect innocent civilian lives. And we condemn, as we've heard from the Prime Minister today, as a government, any indiscriminate attacks and targeting of civilian infrastructure. And as the Prime Minister has said today, the protection of civilian lives must come first, and respect for international humanitarian law is paramount. That is why Australia has also joined the international community's efforts to establish and maintain humanitarian access to Gaza, including safe passage for civilians. And we've done this by engaging with countries in the Middle East and beyond, at all levels, in support of the protection of civilians and the containment of this conflict. We know this is a very challenging time for so many. We are providing multiple repatriation flights out of Israel and communicating with Australians in the region, including identifying Australians, citizens in Gaza. We are continuing to provide updates to registered Australians. The Foreign Minister Wong has specifically called for that safe and unimpeded humanitarian access to civilians affected by the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There have been strong and constant diplomatic efforts by Australia and our allies since the beginning of this crisis, including Minister Wong's efforts with her US and Egyptian counterparts to ensure the Egyptian-controlled Rafah border crossing into Gaza can open as a humanitarian corridor to provide Gaza with Australia's aid and aid from many other countries around the world. In addition, the diplomatic efforts are also geared to ensuring the resumption of water supply, particularly in southern Gaza, where there are many civilians. Foreign Minister Wong and Minister Pat Conroy also announced initial $10 million in humanitarian assistance for civilians affected by the conflict in Gaza, and that is really to provide medical support to victims of conflict, as well as emergency water, nutrition, sanitation and hygiene services, as well as child protection. And the government, of course, is committed to assessing the need for further support as it arises. Deputy Speaker, my role as within the government and as chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security is always one focused on the national interest, and this includes the impact on our national security and implications for Australia's social cohesion from the impacts of regional stability as well as the geopolitical instability arising from this conflict. And I understand that many Australians wish to express their views, and they have strongly held views about this conflict and about what is happening. The Australian government, of course, supports the right of Australians to express their opinions peacefully, in peaceful protest. But we categorically condemn any anti-Semitism, Islamophobia or dehumanisation of any kind. Discriminatory behaviours, hate speech, incitement of hatred and violence based on religion or ethnicity, I utterly condemn. And those behaviours and statements are not the same as Australians' right to peacefully protest. Right now it is more critical than ever that we maintain the social cohesion and the respect for one another to safeguard what we all value, this multicultural, pluralistic society. We should never be indifferent to human suffering, wherever it occurs. We must recognise and embrace our shared humanity, and in these times that is more important than ever. The Prime Minister summed up this approach just recently in this place when he said, "Protecting innocent people is not a show of weakness. It is a measure of strength, because true strength never turns its back on humanity. We care about the lives of everyone caught in this conflict, and that is who we are as Australians."